that feeling of Joe Vogler's in the room here. You know, I mean, he clearly developed the Alaska Independence Party primarily because at the stroke of a pen, we gave 2/3 of the state of Alaska away at statehood. And you know, Joe Vogler said, wait a minute, that's not a good thing at all. Today, you know, if you study it all, we had granted at that time 106 million acres, and I think we've had conveyed 98 million as 50 years later, and they still haven't given that other 8 million acres someplace. But that's not even the issue. The issue is that what is the proper role of the federal government, the state government, and the citizens of the state of Alaska, and I'm sure that Doug will articulate it extremely well. Before I get started with Doug, though, I wanted to give Daniel, our good friend Daniel, an opportunity to address the group. And how about, you know, do you want to make an announcement?
Yeah, on Tuesday, which is the 9th, I think, basically 13th. How many were at the Common Core Symposium in Anchorage a couple weeks ago? It was a fantastic symposium. We're going to do it again in Palmer on the 13th. We're going to do it. It's also going to be in Fairbanks and Glen Ellen over the weekend. So those of you that missed it, it's really good. It traces the roots of Common Core from its origination, which it sounded wonderful at the beginning, and then it evolved over time and went through bureaucracy, Berkeley, consultants, and we got something out of the back end of it that wasn't near what we hoped to have on the front end of it. So if you want to learn about Common Core, it's worth attending. It's 5 to 9 at the Moose Lodge on Tuesday in Palmer.
And if any of you, most of you have my email, so if you forgot that and you want to email me, and I'll send the information back out again. You'll see it on Facebook. There's some advertisements and things of that nature. So, you know, I want to publicly thank Ray. You know, he's consistently giving us a space here. This event's put on by United for Liberty and Alaska Policy Forum with regard to bringing, you know, people in that you can articulate these issues real well. This room here is filled full of a massive amount of political activists. I always like to say, whenever United for Liberty throws the gavel down, we have some of the finest citizens in the state of Alaska in political activism. And, you know, we certainly appreciate it, and Ray, you know, his dedication over the years and years, and everybody here in this room, you know, I mean, there's a tremendous amount of dedication here throughout the state of Alaska for all the common things that we want, and that's our liberty, our freedom, our ability to be able to have land. John Locke said it best, you know, without property, we have nothing. And, you know, that's the truth, life, liberty, and property. And, you know, I can't think of any economic thing that's more important than that. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to Doug Heaton.
Wow, thank you. So, you know, that's me. That's probably enough introduction. So, the American Lands Council. What a ride. I got really frustrated. Let me tell you what the American Lands Council is first. Well, let me tell you what it's not first, okay? American Lands Council is not a pitchfork, radical organization, even though I feel that way sometimes, okay? Sometimes you just want to go shoot something, right?
Yep.
But,
Chuck.
Well, we got a guy in the room to help us do that.
But we're a very disciplined organization who is searching for solutions that are completely legal and completely following the channels of change that were given to us by our founding fathers. You know, they established a tradition, and we are a nation of laws, and we do believe in the rule of law, and I do too. And so that's what we are. We have mapped, I believe, a solution that is what we call it's the only solution big enough. And I think you'll be able to see why when we talk about some of the various advantages of this transfer of public lands. So let's begin. Oh my gosh, I didn't take the slide out. This is why I do so much of what I do. Okay, that's me on one side over here, and it's my wife on the other side, and the rest of those are my kids.
Wow.
And,
You're productive.
I have a wonderful family, okay?
Can we turn this light off, is that possible?
Yeah, I think so. You might have all of them go off, but that's okay.
Nope, that was the wrong one.
That's
That one. Yeah, you can leave both on. Oh, you're good.
Is that good?
That's good, good.
Whatever you guys say, that's. So, I have some goals tonight. I would like to think that I'm here to educate. Now, if you know more than I do, bear with me, okay? So, but I want you to understand that what is versus what was intended regarding the federal ownership of land. We want to make that comparison. I have a goal to convince you that the transfer is possible. This is the biggest obstacle we face. You know, you go in there and say, yeah, we're gonna get the federal government to transfer all of those lands to state ownership, and everybody goes, yeah, right. And it really is laughable, is it not? Because, wow, that's a big goal, okay? I want to motivate you and give you a glimpse of the benefits of the transfer of public lands, and I want you to learn what you can. I want you to learn what you can do to help, okay? That's my goal here. I'm addicted to truth. And I'm not the smartest guy on the block, okay? But let me just share with you, I spend a lot of time searching for true principles. And the reason I do that is because if I understand true principles, I don't have to be as smart as the guys that I'm not as smart as. And let me show you how that works. Let's say that there's a political question comes up, and there's lots of different solutions to the problem. But there's a principle. If I can measure that principle against the question, if the question doesn't agree with the principle, then I know it's a bad idea. I don't have to be smart. All I have to do is be able to measure against the principle. But you got to be able to identify those principles. And I found those principles in wonderful places. A lot of the things that seem to be like really good ideas turn out to be really, really bad ideas. And sometimes you don't know it till after the truth. And sometimes the truth and principles aren't particularly convenient. Sometimes they're hard. Sometimes it's not the easy way. But the principles always work for me. And that's why I'm so committed to principles. Here's a principle, okay? There's no difference between rights that you don't know, the rights that you don't have, and rights that you don't know. That's a principle. If you don't know the truth, if you don't know you have a right, like to your public lands, there's no way that you will ever, it's no different. No different at all, okay? Here's another principle. Every system is perfectly designed to achieve the results that it gets. Now you think about that, and that sounds really, but if you have a business, your business organization is designed to get exactly what you get. If you want to improve the product, you've got to change the system to make it a better system. Every system is designed, and that's kind of where we are in the United States today. Every system is designed, our system is designed to get exactly what we're getting because we have abandoned some principles. Here's another little idea. If we're in a bad place politically, it's because we've abandoned the principles that would have kept us from being in a bad place. In my religion, I don't know, will you forgive me if I make a religious reference? I'm a Mormon, right? Mormons have prophets, okay? One of the prophets we had said this. He said, there's a law irrevocably decreed before the foundations of the world upon which every blessing is predicated. And when we obtain any blessing from God, it's by obedience to the law upon which it's predicated. In other words, if you understand the law, if you want the blessing, if you understand the law, keep the law, you get the blessing. It's just that simple. It's the same way with liberty. If you want to have liberty, you understand the principles upon which liberties are based, you observe those principles, and you will have liberty. Abandon them, and you won't have it. It's just that simple. And it really is that hard and fast. You can't abuse the principles. If we want to get back to a good place, it'll be because we return to the principles that ensure good places. There's no other way to get there. Now, it's true. I mean, you know, people may think I'm crazy. I'm not. It's true. I thought about this for a long, long time. Okay? So, let's talk about this little picture. These are my greatest heroes. I'm convinced that those guys are the greatest collection of political intelligence ever assembled at one time. And I think they were there for a very good reason, to establish the liberties that you and I enjoy. So let's talk about this Constitution that they established. Article 1, rights and powers of the legislature, right? Article 2, rights and powers of the executive branch. Article 3, rights and powers of the courts. What's Article 4? Rights and powers of the states. That's what Article 4 is. And that's important as we go forward. I want you to understand and remember that distinction, because it makes a lot of difference. Did Sarah ever come in?
No.
The door's still locked out there.
We need Sarah to come in. I just had a conversation with her about what I'm about to talk about here in a moment, so if she's around, I need her to come in, because, anyway, no Sarah. Text her, Ray. Okay. And then, some of the greatest principles of all time are found in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. They're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, we all know all of that, except if you really break it down. But then it goes on and says to ensure these rights, governments are instituted among men. Now, I'd ask you the question, are rights being ensured or are rights being taken away by our current system?
Rights being taken away.
They're being taken away. All of these inalienable rights that we keep talking about, that we were ensured, yeah, they're just kind of evaporating before our very eyes. And so that causes me a great deal of concern. Here's another principle. Somebody talked about property rights a minute ago. This was the only Supreme Court justice from the state of Utah. His name was George Sutherland, and this is what he said. Man has three great rights: the right to his life, the right to liberty, and the right to his property. The three rights are so bound together as to be essentially one right. To give a man his life but deny him his liberty is to take away from him all that makes his life worth living. To give him his liberty but take away from him the property, which is the fruit and the badge of his liberty, is to still leave him a slave. True principle. You want to be free, you've got to have the right and control of property. You don't have the right and control of property. Everything, you look around you, and everything that you see, that you use to sustain life or make it comfortable, is derived from our natural environment. You cut me off from my natural environment, where I no longer have the access or have to get permission to derive those things that make my life worth living, and I am no longer free, and I'm no longer prosperous, and all of those things just go away. And so, George Sutherland, what a tremendous thing. Okay, so I'm going to start out with this story. I put this in here so I won't forget to tell the story, right? Southern Utah University is not too far from where I live, and we were at Southern Utah University giving a presentation very similar to the presentation that you're going to hear tonight. And as we conclude that presentation, we had these question and answer period, right? And this old farmer gets up, and he's a typical old farmer, right? He stands up and he says, "Well, I really like what you said, but what are you going to do about those?" I won't quote him. Those blankety blank right over there. And he pointed to the president of the Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance, prominent member of the Democratic Party. And Ken, bless his heart, such a tremendous guy, he says, "Let me be really clear about this. We're not against anybody, but let me tell you what we're for. We're for having the ability to manage our forests so that we don't actually burn them. We're not managing them for maximum combustibility anymore. We're for not burning up all of the little furry creatures in the forest that we profess to know and love. We're for being able, in the process of the management of that forest, to be able to create family-sustaining jobs and to really use that resource to weed that garden so that it is at maximum health, that the animals are at maximum health, and that we are at increased prosperity. We're for actually not having to buy our oil from people who don't even like us, but to be able to have the ability to have energy independence as a nation and all of the security that goes with it. We're for having enough economics to be financially independent as a nation, financially independent as governmental agencies and as private citizens, and to be able to educate our kids in the fashion that they deserve. That's really what we're for. After the meeting, the lady that had been referred to by the old farmer, she came over to me and she said, "Mr. Ivory, I came to this meeting knowing I was going to hate everything you said. But you've created a real problem for me. We need to have a talk. Would you be willing to give your presentation to my group?" Now, the reason I tell you that story is because what I want you to understand, this is not a partisan issue. This is a bipartisan issue. There's not anybody out there who truly is honest, who is not excited to have better environment, better economics, energy independence, and all of that, all of the blessings that go with all of that. This suggestion that we're going to make to you is that it is going to be able to help us on every area that we just talked about. Now, so that brings us to the question. You've probably all seen this map. If you haven't, I've got a bunch of these things. Might ought to have, would you just, let's open the box and start this stuff around. Because what this is I got the little cards. Everybody needs a little card, and everybody needs a bookmark, okay? Let's just go ahead and pass them around. If you've got friends, take 10. Because I really want the message to get out, okay? The red on the map indicates federal ownership of land, and what you find then as you look through this is you see that east of what we call the federal fault line, just east of Colorado, less than 5% federal ownership of land. West of the Colorado, more than 50%. Utah, my state, is 67%. Nevada is 81. You're 62 here in Alaska. Okay, so and the burning question is, why the difference? We have the opportunity to give this presentation a lot. And sometimes there are those who want to hear both sides of the story, so they arrange for a debate, as it were. This happens to us a lot, and we have this one University of Utah professor that is so opposed to what we're doing, and so he loves to debate us, right? So here we go, and we're in the debate. Actually, he used to love to debate us. He gets up and he says this. He says, "You see this map?" He says, "You see how this is the average annual precipitation for the United States of America, excluding Alaska." So he says, "Look and see how green it is and how much moisture there is on the eastern side of this map. And look how dry and arid it is on the western side. Your land is so arid that the federal government decided that you really couldn't handle it, and they decided to keep it."
Where they tell the error.
I'm telling the truth here. This is a true story. And then he goes on and he says, "Your land is so arid and so rugged," and and he gives a spiel, right? And then he goes on and he says, "Besides that, you gave up your land." She said, "I've read the enabling act of all of the western states, and in every one of them it says the same thing, that you forever and always disclaim all right and title to the unappropriated lands. You gave up your land. You didn't want it, apparently, until you gave it up." And then he said, "You have no right to demand it back now." And then he went on, he says, "Your demand for this transfer is just clearly unconstitutional." Okay, and then he sat down.
Who said this?
This is this attorney from this University of Utah guy, professor. And so Ken got up and he said, "Look," he said, we're familiar with the language. He said, first of all, I've never read the arid, rugged clause in the Constitution. He said, there's no basis for your assumption that the land was withheld because it has any unusual terrain. There's nothing in there that says anything about any of that. That simply is not legitimate. He said, we're familiar with the arid, rugged. I'm sorry, the disclaimer. This is in the Utah State's Enabling Act, and this is the language that the people inhabiting said state do agree and declare that they forever disclaim all right and title to the waste or unappropriated lands, okay? And that the same shall remain at the entire disposition of the United States. And the old boy had quoted this to us, and then put as though there were a period at the end of that little clause. He said, we're really aware of that, but wait, whoa. This is Alabama's Enabling Act, and they only have 2% federally owned land. So let's try again. Okay, so here it is, but wait a minute. This is Louisiana's. They only have 4.6% public land. Nebraska only has 1%, exactly the same enabling legislation. Nebraska is really interesting because it came into the Union at approximately the same time that Nevada came into the Union. Here you see Nevada and Nebraska's enabling acts side by side. Nebraska has 1% federally owned land. Nevada has 81% federally owned land. Why the difference? Enabling legislation is exactly, word for word, the same. Okay? Let's talk about Hawaii and Alaska. This is the same enabling act. Whoa, wait a minute. Hawaii is declared to be a state, Alaska. Okay, so it's all the same right here. Exactly the same. Next slide. Exactly the same, except for the date. Alaska comes in 58, Hawaii comes in 59. Next slide. United States grants to the state of Hawaii effective upon submission into the Union, United States title to all public lands and other public property, and all the lands defined as available lands, title to which is held by the United States immediately prior to its submission into the Union. Alaska, not so much. No language. And then it goes on and defines what it means by public lands. No language in Alaska's Enabling Act. Goes on and it talks about that, let's see. Anything that the federal government owns, like the buildings and stuff in Alaska, in Hawaii, the state has to relinquish all claims to the state, to the federal property, like, the federal building, stuff like that. Anyway, you guys got hosed, sorry. It's different, and Alaska's probably has probably the most difficult enabling language of any of the 50 states. Not insurmountable, because you still have this duty to dispose in there. So talks about how the money is to be paid for education and stuff like that. Okay, so I'm not going to go into that because it really isn't germane to what we're doing. So this is the language, and we get this forever disclaim all right and title of the unappropriated lands lying within the boundaries. But look at what happens after you go past what he thought was a period. It really wasn't, it's just a comma. And that until title thereto shall have been extinguished by the United States, the same shall be and remain subject to the disposition, not retention, of the United States, okay? The duty to dispose is just as clear to me as it can possibly be. They have the land, they definitely have the title, with the duty to dispose. Those lands were held in trust to be disposed of for the creation of new Republican states. We're gonna go through that, I'll show you this, what that's like. So we got 66%. What is enabling legislation, folks? What is it? Is it not an agreement, a contract, if you will, between those who want to be a state and those who already are, right? That's what it is. It's just this contract, binding, the Supreme Court called it sacred contract between those who want to be states and those who already are. And those agreements, those conditions on those enabling acts are, well, let's read it from legal opinion. Solemn compacts, bilateral two-way agreements to be performed in a timely fashion. Now, if there's a duty to dispose, what happened to timely? Timely fashion is important here. Okay, another one. Federal government holds territorial lands in trust for the several states ultimately to be created out of the territory. What is a trust? It's the highest obligation in law. I mean, it just doesn't get any more sacred than this in our legal system. Federal government has a trust to manage those lands until it has a duty to dispose of them, right? Let's go on. Whenever once the United States shall have fully executed these trusts, the municipal sovereignty of the new states will be complete throughout their respective borders, and they and their original states will be upon equal footing in all respects whatever. The United States never held any municipal sovereignty, jurisdiction, or right of soil in and for the territory of the new states except for temporary purposes and to execute the trust created by the acts of Virginia and the Georgia legislatures. Okay? Sacred trust, duty to dispose. Let me give you a little history. Back to the founding fathers, okay? 1763. King George, King of England, grants charters to the 13 original colonies, which made them into a colony, right? When he did that, he granted to 7 of those colonies claims to the western wasteland, which was the land going, gosh, I thought I had a map. Okay, I'm out of sequence. I'm going to start over. We're not going to tell that story right now, but we're going to go into the Constitution of the United States. And don't worry, this is not going to be painful. It's just going to be kind of.
Are we gonna get back to King George?
What?
Yeah.
What is Article 1 again? Rights and duties on Congress, the legislature, yes? Okay, so Article 1, Section 8. This is where the founding fathers declared what the federal government could own by way of real property, right here. Article 1, Section 8. It's found in the first section of the Constitution of the United States. And this is what it says. They may have exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over the district not to exceed 10 miles square. That, of course, is Washington, D.C. As made by session of the particular states and the acceptance of Congress become the seat of government for the United States. And to exercise like authority over all places purchased by the consent of the legislature of the state in which the same shall be, for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other equal buildings. So they got 10 miles square plus whatever the states decide to give them for federal official operational purposes. Any question, any problem with what we just done? Okay? Article 1, Section 8. Now, let's look at Article 6, Clause 1. Article 6, Clause 1 becomes very important in this discussion because some of what we're going to talk about goes back before the Constitution was actually ratified. This is what it says. All debts contracted, engagements entered into before the adoption of this Constitution shall be as valid against the Constitution as it was against the Articles of Confederation. Okay? Any question about what that just said? If we had an agreement under the Articles of Confederation, it's binding on us under the Constitution. Question about that? Okay, let's move on. Now let's go to and this is the crux. Article 4, Section 3 is known as the Property Clause of the United States. Everything that the Department of Interior does, they do it under this authority right here. Okay? It's pretty simple. And what it says is Congress shall have power to what? Dispose. Right? of and make all needful rules and regulations respecting the territory or other property belonging to the United States. And then it says this, it says, nothing in this Constitution shall be so construed as to prejudice any claims of the United States or of any particular state. Now, I'd like to see by show of hands how many of you know what the claims are. What were the claims that were, when they did the Article 4, Section 3, there's only one page of debate on the creation of Article 1, Section 3, the property clause. And this is what it said. So, this is not the whole page, but this is the summary, and it gives you the idea of what's going on. So, Mr. Carroll had made a motion, and Mr. Wilson is concerned. He said there's nothing in the Constitution affecting one way or other the claims of the U.S., and it was best to insert nothing, leaving everything on that litigated subject in the status quo. We've already been through this, guys. We've hashed it out in courts. We've argued about it. We came to a solution. Let's just leave it alone. Now, Mr. Madison was a little bit concerned. He thought it was best on the whole to be silent on the subject. He did not view the proviso of Mr. Carroll as dangerous, but to make it neutral and fair, it ought to go further and say that the claims of the particular states should not be affected. Okay? Didn't want anything interrupting good old Madison, one of my great heroes. He was protecting the states' rights here. Okay? So when Mr. Carroll withdraws his motion altogether, and he said, okay, I'm going to change the motion. I'm going to say nothing in the Constitution shall be construed to alter the claims of the U.S. or the individual states to the Western Territory. Governor Morris went ahead and reworded it, and that's what we have right there. Article 4, Section 3. Okay, so let's go on and see what those claims were. What were the claims? Okay, so now I'm going to go back to George. Okay, King George grants to the 13 colonies their charters. 7 of them get claims to the additional wasteland. Now, you can see the green there. It goes all the way over to the Mississippi River, and this map actually shows who had those particular claims. 6 of them didn't get any claims. A few years later, 1776, we now have a Declaration of Independence, and there's really a lot of tension between the United States and Britain, and we get into a war with Britain. And by 1780, this thing has gotten very serious. The first 3 years of the Revolutionary War were almost entirely funded by a guy by the name of Robert Morris. You talk about lives, fortunes, and sacred honor. This dude, by 1780, Robert Morris was bankrupt. And now the United States has a real problem because they have no more funding source, right? No ability to tax, remember? The colonists at that point had not trusted the central government with the ability to tax. Their memory was still very fresh about what taxes were like when tyrants got, and they weren't about to create another tyrant, okay? And so they got a real problem. Some of the states step forward and they say, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll sell off part of our western wastelands, and we'll utilize that money to pay our share of the war debt. And the other 6 colonies step up and they say, wait a minute, we don't have any western wastelands, so you're going to sell off part of your western, you're going to become these big landed states, and we're going to be left over here little unlanded states with a lot of debt and a lot of taxes on our people. Our people are going to leave our states, go to your states, and we're going to get left holding the bag on this deal. That is entirely unacceptable. Just because you happen to be fortunate enough to be granted extra land. And the conflict over this thing became so sharp that we came close to having a revolution or a civil war in the middle of our Revolutionary War. It's called the Great Embarrassment. You may have heard about it, read about it when you were in history back when you were a kid. So what they did is they said, okay, I'll tell you what, the Confederacy stepped in. They said, look, you guys just cede those western wastelands to us. Be content with the size of the state that you currently are. We'll sell those lands and we'll pay the war debt. Now, what were they trying to escape from? What was the war over? Was it not over a land baron? who tried very hard to control all of the subjects? Wasn't that what that whole war was about? The unfair, you know, unfair taxes and this and that, because kings own everything. That was what it was about. What do you think's the chance that these colonies are gonna trade one land baron for another? Not much chance. They had no trust in government. They were really, really shy about giving powers to government. But what they finally said was, okay, look, I'll tell you what we'll do. We will cede back to the central government the claims to these lands. We'll give them title, but only on two conditions. Number one, the proceeds are to be used for the payment of the debt of the war. And number two, that they are to be used for the creation of new republican states on equal footing with the original, and for no other purpose or reason whatsoever. That was the conditions upon which they granted to the federal government title to the unappropriated or waste lands, right? That was done in what was called the Resolution of 1780. It resolved the great embarrassment. Now they have money to go forward with the war, okay? Resolution of 1780. Here's some language from the Resolution of 1780. Remember that these are binding on the Confederacy and equally binding on the Constitution. This is an important key. Article 6, Section 1 is critical here. Yes,
Who did they sell the wastelands to?
private citizens.
Private citizens.
Yep, it just became private property. Resolved that the unappropriated lands that may be ceded or relinquished to the United States by any particular state shall be disposed of for the common benefit of the United States and to be settled and formed into distinct republican states which shall become members of the Federal Union and shall have the same rights of sovereignty, freedom, and independence as the other states. That the said land shall be granted and settled at such times and under such regulations as shall be hereafter agreed by the United States and Congress assembled. Now, there's some claims there. There are some things that we said we would do. We're gonna pick those out in just a minute. Another land ordinance of 1784 was fairly critical. A lot of the same stuff reiterated. Look at the language. The state shall in no case interfere with the primary disposal of the soil by the United States and Congress assembled, nor with the ordinances and regulations which Congress may find necessary for securing title in such soil to the bona fide purchaser. There's some claims right there. We'll recap them in a minute. And that such states shall be admitted by its delegates in the Congress of the United States on equal footing with the said original states. Okay? Northwest Ordinance, 1787. This is written at the same time, basically, as the Constitution of the United States was drafted. So look at this one. Provide for the establishment of the states and for their admission to a share in the federal councils on an equal footing with the original states. Legislatures of those new states shall never interfere with the primary disposal of the soil by the United States and Congress assembled, nor with any regulations Congress may find necessary for securing such title to the bona fide purchaser. Okay, let's look at the claims that the federal government can claim from those things. This is Article 4, Section 3. Nothing shall disparage any of the claims, right, of the federal government. Here they are. Lands granted and settled at such times and under such regulation as Congress determines. They get to pick the time and the place. Okay? 2, the states cannot interfere with the primary disposal of the soil. The states cannot do that. By the way, that's why we get forever disclaim all right and title. Because was it not necessary for the government to have a clear title to the land that they were to dispose? You know how much it complicates the sale process when there's claims and liens and all kinds of stuff on a title? You attorneys can talk about that, right? The states had to give up title so the federal government would have a clear title. That, remember how it said that the states can't interfere with the disposal process? That's why. Number 3, so the states can't interfere with the ordinances and regulations which Congress may find necessary for securing the title to the bona fide purchaser. States couldn't interfere with that sale process. Let's talk about the claims of the states now. The state said, the claims to the states were that the lands in trust shall be disposed of. This was a trust obligation. You own the land, but you've got to dispose for these purposes, very specific purposes. Number 2, that they were to be used for the creation of new republican states.
And number 3, the same rights of sovereignty, freedom, and independence as the original equal footing. Equal footing. Equal footing becomes a great big deal, especially when you start thinking about 1% versus 81% federally managed lands. How can that be equal footing? This is not equal footing, not in any stretch of the imagination. Okay, so there you are. You're back to this. Article 4, Section 3, and now you know more than 97% of the lawyers and judges of the United States of America about Article 4, Section 3, because you know what the claims are. I've never met an attorney who knew what the claims were. Never. Well, one. And he's the guy that did the research, Ken Ivory. But the judges went to the same law schools that the attorneys went to. And they don't teach this in law school. They teach case law. Am I wrong? No. I'm right. Okay. So they don't know. You know now what Article 4, Section 3 is. And if it weren't for some research from really smart guys, I wouldn't know either, because I didn't know either until I started to pursue this really wonderful course we're on. Okay, so time passes. The western states have had enough. They said to the Congress, look, you're not disposing of the public lands the way you promised. We can't use the lands to adequately fund education. We can't tax them. Our ability to grow our economy and generate well-paying jobs is stifled. And the federal government is hoarding our abundant minerals and our natural resources. That sound familiar?
Yeah.
That was in 1828. In 1828, the states of Missouri and Alabama and Louisiana and Arkansas and Tennessee and all those states, and they come to the federal government and they say, come on, got to dispose of the land. That was actually started. So these are the states: Illinois, Missouri, Indiana, Arkansas, Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, and Florida. And they've been as much as 90% control for decades. You got to dispose. That's what they're saying. You got to dispose of the lands. There was.
You might want to say, Doug, why that situation developed. And it was because when they were selling the lands to satisfy the debts, it was $1.25 an acre flat rate cash sale act. And so that was a fairly high price. And key town sites and properties along rivers sold, but it stopped at that point. There was no way to lower the price, so it just went into a mortmain, a static situation. Right. And that's why this developed this way.
So this guy rises up, and his name is Thomas Hart Benton. He was a Democrat from the state of Missouri, and he took this cause and he basically ran with it. And he just goes on and he talks about how, he said, I found me doing for an ameliorated system of disposing of our public lands. With some success, I resolved to move against the whole system, and I did so in a bill annually renewed for a long time. The speeches had more effect on. This is a fairly long thing. I'm not going to bore you with all of that, but this is this. There were like 7 slides there that talked about what he said. Basically, this guy goes to battle. He was so courageous on this thing that he was actually included in President Kennedy's book, Profiles on Courage. The guy just made he changed the history of the United States. And finally, Congress did exactly that. There's another. This shows the report. This was one of the. It was the report on public lands. Sorry. Okay, the graduated price. Okay, so this is what he said. If these lands are to be withheld from sale, which is the effect of the present system, in vain may the people of these states expect advantages of well-settled neighborhoods so essential to the education of youth and to the pleasures of social intercourse and having the advantages of religious instruction. Those states will, for many generations without some change, be retarded in their endeavors to increase their wealth, their comfort and wealth. Because they have not the power incident to all sovereign states of taxing the soil to pay for the benefits conferred upon its owners by roads and canals. And then they went on, they said this, they said, when we agreed, when the states stipulated not to tax those lands of the United States until they were sold, They rested upon the implied engagement of Congress to cause them to be sold within a reasonable time. No just equivalent has been given those states for a surrender of an attribute of sovereignty so important to their welfare and to an equal standing with the original states. The spirit of the federal Constitution, which knows no inequality in the powers and the rights of the several states. We've got to do this. We've got to do this. And it finally happened. The legislature finally did it. There was another, I don't know whether I got this in my slide presentation here or not. Yeah, this is another. The state of Missouri could never have been brought to consent not to tax the lands of the United States while unsold, and not to tax the land sold until after 5 years thereafter. It had been understood that the system was to be pursued, which would prevent 9/10 of those lands from ever becoming the property of persons in whose hands they might be taxed. These are the arguments that came to them. There was an interesting case with Andrew Jackson. He was the president in 1832. And somebody's entered a bill into the legislature, and it actually passed both houses. And what it basically said was, it said, by now the war debt was all satisfied. The United States was completely out of debt in 1832. And that would be different, wouldn't it? And what happened was they said, okay, the debt's all paid, and we have these lands, and the money's still kind of coming in, but what we'll do is we'll collect this money into a fund, and when the states do what we want them to do, we'll give them some of the money. Right? That was the bill, and it passed. Well, Andrew Jackson vetoed the bill. He said, you don't understand. Remember when Andrew Jackson was born in 1767. He was a 20-year-old lawyer when the Constitution was ratified, okay, when it was written. And he got it. He understood what had happened. And this is what he said. He said, the price of these lands shall be reduced and graduated. And after they've been offered for a certain number of years, refuse remaining sold shall be abandoned to the states, and the machinery of our land system entirely withdrawn. Can't be supposed that the compacts intended that the United States should forever retain title to the lands of the states which are of no value, and no doubt has entertained the general interest to be best promoted by surrendering such lands to the states. And that's what they did. Okay?
So that counters the arid aspect then, doesn't it?
It does what?
It kind of counters that arid argument, doesn't it?
Yeah, it kind of puts that to rest, doesn't it? Let's fast forward to 1928. 1928, we have a similar thing happening. The new western states of Utah, Arizona, Idaho, Wyoming, Montana, and those states now go back to the federal government. They say basically the same arguments. You have failed to dispose the way you said you would dispose. You've got to dispose of the land. And so there was a proposal by the agencies, and they actually formulated a bill. And the bill said, okay, tell you what, we will deed to you the land. You'll have all the surface rights, but we're going to keep all the subsurface minerals and natural resources, all of the oil, all of the minerals, that kind of stuff, coal. And the state said, I don't think so. You know, they basically said, the governor of my state, the state of Utah, said, that's like giving us the skin of a squeezed lemon. You've given us all of the expense, and you kept all the treasure. No way. That's not going to happen. And they rejected the offer. They said, no, that just isn't going to happen. So in the midst of all this, we actually acquired this little thing. This was granting remaining unreserved public lands to the states. That's the discussions from the 72nd Congress. This was the actual document. So the states defeat the proposal, and so now we end up with, come on. So now we come up and Congress passed the Taylor Grazing Act. And you're familiar probably with the Taylor Grazing Act. You may be. Taylor Grazing Act. Look at the purpose in the statute. In order to promote the highest use of the public lands, pending its final disposal. Okay? Everybody knew that the federal government had a duty to dispose. They all knew it. Everybody knew it. Even the government knew it, okay? 1859, United States grants to the state of Hawaii effective upon its admission into the Union, United States title to all the public lands and other public property within the boundaries of the state of Hawaii, title to which is held by the United States immediately prior to its admission into the Union. Gave all of the land to Hawaii. There was no federal withholding. They got it all, okay? 1976, FLPMA, Federal Lands Policy Management Act, was passed by Congress. And this is what it said. Congress declares that it's the policy of the United States that the public lands be retained in federal ownership unless it's determined that a particular parcel may serve the national interest disposal. Okay. They just changed the rules. They moved from a policy of disposal to a policy of retention. Okay? No consulting with the states about this. They just did it. And there was a fair uprising. You may be familiar with the Sagebrush Rebellion. It sparked the Sagebrush Rebellion. And you remember that was kind of a probably not very well thought out, okay? But they at least were sincere. Okay. So for nearly 200 years, everybody knew that the federal government had a duty to dispose. Okay? And then in 1976, they changed the rules. This is a fun case, Hawaii versus Hawaiian Affairs. Let me give you a little background. Okay. 1892, the industrial powers conquered the nation of Hawaii, and they just took their lands. Subsequently, they deeded those lands to the United States of America, so that became a U.S. property. 1992, 100 years later, Senator Inoue, a native from Hawaii, writes an apology resolution. And on the floor of the Senate, he makes this big plea, and they pass this apology resolution. And it said basically this: we apologize to the Native Hawaiians for what we did to them 100 years ago. So sorry, guys. We took your land. We realize that was a bad thing now, but we are where we are. So nothing in this resolution will disparage any claims of the Native Hawaiians. And it passed. 2001 or something, I'm not sure about the date of this, but Hawaii starts selling some of the land that they own as a state, and all of a sudden the natives stand up and say, whoa, wait a minute, you can't do that. We have claims. Remember Senator Inoue, 1992, apology resolution? Nothing in this resolution shall disparage any claims. You can't do that. And the state of Hawaii says, you're crazy. What are you talking about? Sure we can. We have title to the property. We can sell it to anybody we want to. Goes to the district court. District court says, sorry guys, you have no claims. Goes to the Hawaiian Supreme Court. No, you've got claims. You do have claims. Look, Senator Inouye's resolution, nothing shall disparage the claims. Goes to the Supreme Court of the United States. And this is what they said. 2009, unanimous Supreme Court decision. The consequences of admission are instantaneous, and it ignores the uniquely sovereign character of that event to suggest that subsequent acts of Congress, events, can somehow diminish what has already been bestowed. And this proposition applies with even greater force where virtually all of a state's public lands are at stake.
Ooh.
Roll it back.
What just happened? The Supreme Court said that no subsequent act of Congress can change the conditions or the agreements in those solemn compacts and statements.
I got a copy of FLPMA at the office, I'll just tear it in half.
You realize what just happened? FLPMA is unconstitutional, in my opinion. Now, courts do whatever they want, you know, judges are, but do we have a case? Is the transfer of public lands law passed by the state of Utah clearly unconstitutional? No, I don't think so. I don't think so. So as much as 90% of the lands in Illinois, Missouri, Arkansas, etc., were federally controlled for decades, and they banded together and they refused to take no for an answer, and Congress finally acquiesced and gave them their public lands. 1959, Congress granted directly to the state of Hawaii, the last and most western state, the United States, title to all of the public land. We've got a case. We've got a really, really good case. And we actually had the Federalist Society. It's an organization of over probably 3,000 constitutional lawyers and scholars. And we asked them to do a white paper, tell us. They did a white paper. And the conclusion was really, I've got, somewhere here, I've got some little flash drives. I'll sell them to you. Ken says I gotta sell them because they cost us $5 and we're kind of, hurting for cash. So, but it has copies of all of this stuff on it. The little flash drive you can plug in and just bring up more stuff than you wanted to know. So, but their conclusion was really, really intriguing case that has never been tried in a court of law. And it just brings up questions that, anyway, it was a marvelous thing. We got another one too. Brigham Young University also did a white paper study analyzing this bill and the constitutionality of the bill. Clearly, it is constitutional, and it brings up a great question, yes.
You skipped one act though, that's the 1906 Antiquities Act.
Mm-hmm.
How does that impact all this? Because that's where they took all that land for public lands, public parks, or national parks and all that good stuff. How does that impact on this?
You want a layman's opinion? I'd be happy to give you one, but it's probably not very binding. But the Antiquities Act, you know what? I'm not qualified to answer the question. Let me just say that. Okay? In my opinion, the Antiquities Act, the federal government was dealing with something that they probably didn't have authority to deal with. Why do we make governments? For the preservation of what? The rights, right? Declaration of Independence, we read that just a few minutes ago, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted. Are governments instituted to protect? They're to protect me from you, and you from me. Are they to protect me from me? Then how can they tell us what to have for school lunch?
Exactly.
It's an overreach, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, I think, to answer the question though, it's the same as the other law. No subsequent law can change something that was already established.
Yeah.
I mean, by the Constitution. So Congress does not have authority to change the Constitution.
In my opinion,
I think that's the answer to the Antiquities.
I think it is, and I think it's the answer to a lot of the other things that have become so onerous. Yeah. Okay, so now I've given you kind of a background in what our position is on the history and the law regarding the Constitution. Why does it matter? Let's talk for a minute about budgets. This, and I don't know, I should have done some research and figured out what Alaska does, but I suspect it's not unlike what we have in Utah. We have a $16.2 billion annual budget. $7.3 billion of that annual budget is federally sourced. It comes from the federal government. Does that make anybody in Utah nervous? When you got a looming $7.3 billion hole in your budget, if the federal government all of a sudden was unable to perform, if they closed down? Well, that never happened. Wait, it happened last year. Or if the federal government decided all of a sudden that they were not able any longer to print $85 billion a month because they could no longer find a buyer for the debt. That's frightening to me. And here's the, does this make anybody nervous? That only goes to 17. We were at 16.7 when this was printed. We're over 18 now. 18 trillion. Anybody know what $1 trillion looks like?
It's $1 billion to the moon, et cetera.
Let me put this in perspective for you.
You know what 150 looks like.
This is kind of a fun little thing I like to do. Let's decide. Let's assume that you decided to count to $1 trillion, and so you began this quest. I'm going to count to $1 trillion. One number per second. Don't stop to eat or sleep or anything else. You're just going to count right on through, right? How long do you suppose it'd take you?
6 or 7 years.
Do you know the answer? 30, not quite, just shy of 32,000 years.
Wow.
How faster?
count faster. Yeah, that's right.
So you got an iPhone, you know, you get off the iPhone and you just hit and bam, you're there in no time flat.
Trillion is a big number, but that's not the real number, because they don't do their accounting like you and I have to do our accounting. We have to book all of our future obligations. They don't do that. They only book what is currently, our actual deficit last year was 5 trillion, under the rules of normal cost accounting. Okay? So it's worse than you realize. We've done this. I'm gonna skip through some of this stuff. Sequestration, you guys we saw this a year or two ago, and they're saying, no, I'm sorry. That makes me really nervous with the state budget. Sequestration, their PILT comes in question. They're holding on to 53 million that they owe to Wyoming. They said, you got plenty of money, you don't need ours. And they want 18 million back from the timber counties because sequestration was gonna, it's kind of a circus. Okay, why does it matter? Let's talk for a minute about funds for education. And again, I apologize, the only thing I know is Utah. Look at the two maps. Top map is the states in red that have the hardest time growing their funds for education. Bottom is the familiar map, federal ownership. Notice any similarities in that map? Yeah, you're in the middle of that scenario also. Utah is 2.6 billion behind the national average in per pupil funding. I don't know how to make up 2.6 billion. Somebody said we'll just have less kids. I don't like that solution. I happen to like all my kids, and I think they deserve an education. But in order to get there, you cannot tax your way into an acceptable situation there. You'd have to 10 times the corporate tax. You'd have to like 5 or 6 times the income tax to tax your way out of that hole. And what does that do? Well, California knows what it does when you do that, because all your industry leaves and goes away, and the next thing you know, you've got, bad scenario.
The community of Wrangell, where I went to elementary school, is a community where 64% of their budget for the school comes from Secure Rural Schools funding. When they don't know where 64% of their budget is going to be coming from on a year-to-year basis, it causes a great deal of stress. The PILT program, of course, is permanent, so we're not concerned about the program expiring, but what we are concerned about is the level at which the program is funded. PILT was created in 1976 by Congress because we changed our federal land policy from one that was focused on disposal to one that was focused on retention. These payments are literally payments in lieu of taxes to compensate our local governments for the loss in tax revenue caused by this change in policy. Secure Rural Schools, unlike PILT, is largely a replacement program for the receipt-sharing programs, whether it's the Forest Service payments to states and the Bureau of Management that Oregon and California have for their payments. These payments made under these programs were historically from receipts generated by timber sales for roads and school purposes. But I think we recognize that they were never intended to be a permanent entitlement program, but more specifically a temporary short-term bridge to allow the communities to transition to the new economic reality that was forced upon them by environmental policies that were designed to halt timber harvesting. But if you're a community like Ketchikan, where I was born down in southeast Alaska, Ketchikan, their private taxable lands within the Ketchikan Gateway Borough are 0.3%. 0.3%. So if you have no other place to go, if 96.5% of the land in your borough is held by the federal government, the state has 1.3%, the local government has 0.3%, there is 0.3% that is taxable land. So when you say you've got this federal policy that says you can't harvest within the Tongass because we're just saying you can't harvest in the Tongass, and you have no place to go for your tax base, and we say, well, this is just going to be a temporary program for you until you can transition. The question is, what do you transition to? But I think we all know, I mean, we're having budget conversations this week. It's on everybody's mind. Federal government's broke here. We can't continue to pay counties to not utilize the lands within their boundaries. And Mr. Chairman, you have appropriately suggested where we need to go with this. You need to be able to access the resources that are on your lands. We either need to utilize our federal lands to generate the revenue and the jobs for our rural communities, or we should divest the federal government of those lands and let the states or the counties, the boroughs manage them.
Yes. I like that.
I'd go so far as saying not manage them, have them back.
Yeah, no, well, that's what she said, we need to divest and let the counties and yeah, I love that quote. I've never met Senator Murkowski, but
Ain't missing anything.
I got it. I think she'll be an ally with us on this particular question.
Don't trust her.
Don't trust her?
Lisa Murkowski is the lady that has shown over the years that she has no spine. If the leadership looks at her cross-eyed, she abandons her position.
She gave us Eric Holder.
I'm sorry, you guys just blew up my bubble. I heard that sound button, I thought, yeah, this is a lady I can like. Okay, so,
By the way, not everybody agrees with that position. And I can find things that I would disagree with the senator on too, but
yeah.
I'll tell you what, she is about 98% of where she needs to be, and
Nope.
I've watched.
I don't wanna get into an internal civil war here. Yeah, I did, sorry. Let's talk for a minute about environmental concerns. You guys are gonna be getting tired here any moment. I got a plane to catch, so. This shows wildfires, greater than 250 acres since 1980, okay? Notice any similarities in the map?
All in federal areas.
It's all in that arid country.
Yeah.
Wait, is Alaska arid?
Yep.
It's in that arid country, you said it. Yeah.
Well, we're just desert up there, you know, you go up there in the tundra and the Andes.
This is such a fascinating map. Look at this, okay? Blue is private, yellow is state, green is federal. Starts over there in about 52. You see how the green just got really big and they had federal harvest clear over until about 1992 or 3. It started dropping way off. The federal lands generate new growth equivalent to about 16 billion board feet a year. At the height of the timber harvest, we were harvesting somewhere between 11, 12, maybe 13 billion board feet, which meant that there was still another 5 or so that was being unharvested. In fact, we were growing trees faster than we were cutting them, even at the height of the timber harvest season. Right now, we're between 1 and 2 billion board feet a year that we're harvesting. That means there's like 14 or 15 billion board feet of new growth in the forest every single year. Look at this map. This map is wildfires. Look down there at about 1945 when the timber harvest started, and it comes down as the timber harvest increases. Look how the wildfires decrease through 45, 50, 70, 80. Look what happens when the timber harvest stalled. Look what happened to the wildfires.
Jeez.
That is not just an accident. There's a reason for that, and I don't know. I live in the woods. There's 100 people in my town, and we're surrounded by wild land, forest, stuff like that. Let me tell you what I know about forest. Our arid, you don't have this problem so much here, but our arid climate will sustain about 40 trees an acre. If you do not weed this garden, if you allow it just to run rampant, it isn't long before you got 400 trees an acre. You know what happens when you got 400 trees an acre? The competition is so stiff. Number one, you don't get any big trees anymore. You can have a 100-year-old tree that's this big around. That's what happens. The second thing that happens is the tree's only defense against the beetle is sap, pitch. And so what happens is the beetle bores in, hits the cambium layer, and the tree pitches him out, right? If the tree is stressed and there isn't enough water to go around, it doesn't have enough sap to pitch him out, and the tree will lose the battle with the beetle.
And we've seen that. You've probably seen it in your state.
Oh, yeah.
It happens in my state all the time. Okay, so now we have forests that are beginning to die. And the next thing that happens is the wildfires. This is about 25 miles from my home. It's on Cedar Mountain. This was probably the
Near
world's-
Homer?
I'm sorry?
That looks like the Kenai.
Yeah.
We got areas like that.
This was, when I was, in 1990, this was probably the best Engelmann spruce forest in the world. Yeah.
Wow.
We had beetles, and we knew we had beetles, and the Forest Service marked those areas with the beetle infestation, and they said, cut them, get them out of there. That was our way of dealing with the beetles. We just removed the beetle from the forest in the tree. The Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance sued and blocked the suit for blocked the sales for several years. By the time we got the thing out of litigation, this is what we had left. I don't believe there's a single adult Engelmann spruce in that forest that's still alive. I don't think there's even one.
The forest is dead.
It's absolutely dead, except for, you got some alpine, some white fir. There's some other forest trees in there, but this was an Engelmann spruce forest, and it is gone. My children will never see that forest ever again. My grandchildren, my great-grandchildren will never see that forest like it was. Why? Because current environmental policy is devastating to the environment. Just pure and simple. You take this forest, down in Arizona, they've had a number of fires in Arizona this last few years that break all the records. We're making new records every single year. And they're becoming increasingly catastrophic. So what happens is now the Sierra Club or the Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance, this is a huge money-making thing for them. I have made them a ton of money. Because what I do is I do crazy things like the American Land Council Transfer of Public Lands. They go to all these people who donate to them. You've got to help us stop this bad man, right? And it's a big fundraiser for them. The people in the cities do not understand the forest economy. They contribute to the devastation of the forest. What happens to an animal? The animals in the forest, what happens to them?
They're dead.
They die. Pure and simple. We're killing millions upon millions of animals every single year in these forests. They say, well, they just run away from the fire. No, they don't. I live in the forest. I know what they do. You frighten an animal, they go where they have always felt safe. They have comfort zones, just like you and I have comfort zones. They go home and they hide. And by the time they figure out that this danger isn't going to pass, it's too late.
One question, has that devastation of the trees, has it affected the soil conditions?
The soil is another question. That's a really great question. So what you have in a healthy forest is an increasingly thick layer of duff. You know what the duff does? Protects the soil from the evaporation. So you get a really thick layer of duff underneath the trees, and if you clean that out periodically and keep the trees from getting too dense, and you can keep that forest healthy, when the water falls from the sky, it goes into the ground, and it creates what we call a watershed. And the springs come alive, and if you get too many trees, the springs go away, right? Because the trees are sucking up all the water as it falls. But if you get the right number of trees, if you get a healthy forest environment, it's open enough that the grass can grow on top. It's open enough that the animals can come and go and run and do the things that they do. Just south of my home, about 50 miles, there's a forest called the Kaibab National Forest. We harvested the Kaibab National Forest from about 1940 till about 1992 when the spotted owl and the goshawk shut us down. That was the most beautiful forest you can imagine. It's like Eden, man. You go out there and it's really fun. The animals are there. You go just a little further south, and it's the Grand Canyon National Monument, the park. Inside the park, there is no harvest. Guess where the animals live? They live in the Kaibab National Forest. Because in the virgin, I keep saying, and people hate me for this, virgin forests are a mess. They're a mess because there's no maintenance, and the deadfall gets deeper, and it gets uglier and more tangled, and the deer don't go there. Deer go where they have a chance to escape when the predator approaches. They want a place to run. And in that Kaibab National Forest, they would break themselves in half if they tried to run through there. It's just too clogged up. And eventually we get a fire and then it cleans everything out. The environmental movement, the environmentalists, this is the message that we need to be able to articulate, is that the environmental movement has been more devastating to our environments than every other factor combined. It's a true story.
I wanted to ask, has the state of Utah done any investigation? Because when I see a forest like this damaged, I think of, you know, rural communities and hunters and people who are outdoors enthusiasts who, you know, that's how they fill their freezers with that meat. And has there been any study of what's happened to those people? What's happened to rural communities that have been affected by the deaths of these forests?
Our hunting laws are such that you can only hunt during a very, very short period of time during the fall, like the deer and the elk and stuff like that. We've kind of weaned ourselves off from relying on that supply of food. We you know, people hunt more for sport now than for actual food. So I don't know that it's been that devastating to us in that regard, other than, because that's been the rule for a long time. We haven't been able to hunt wholesale for many, many years, and not even in my lifetime. So, okay, just north of me in Paiute County, the Forest Service announced a 70,000 acre control burn.
How do you do that?
Management burn. That's a great question. How do you do that? Anyway, so they got, what we have done to the Forest Service, and I feel bad for them. What we've done to them is we've said that fire is the only tool you have left. That's a really, really hard scenario to be in, because once you get the densities you have, how do you do a control burn? But anyway, they announced this control burn. So the Paiute County Commissioner, my friend Darren Bushman, goes to the Forest Service and he says, look, do what you got to do, but before you do, let us lower the liability of the fire, the danger of the fire, and go in and let us remove the dead trees. This was a forest that had basically been beetle killed significantly. Let us take the trees out. We'll make some of them into poles for houses and poles for barns and firewood and all these things. Let us do that. And the Forest Service response was, we can't do that. That would require an EPA, an environmental impact study.
National Environmental
That would be
Protection.
extremely expensive and take a long, long time. We don't have that kind of time. So, no, the answer is no. You cannot go into the forest and harvest the dead timber before we do the burns. That's the level of common sense that we've come to.
But they don't have a requirement to do a NEPA before they burn,
They do not have a requirement to do NEPA before they burn, no. Kind of unbelievable, yeah?
Well, it's exempt, it's that, it's still, NEPA still applies, but it's an exemption, a management exemption.
Okay. This is another interesting.
Carbon dioxide that they make when they burn that forest. What about the global warming?
What about the carbon footprint?
Yeah.
Yeah, wow, good question.
Don't ask Obama that,
Yeah.
that's not a fact.
Al-Qaeda has figured out that those western forests are one way for the price of a match to do intergenerational damage. This is actually from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and they're quoting from the Al-Qaeda's Inspire magazine. What a name for a magazine. They're quoting from Al-Qaeda's Inspire magazine when they say that Al-Qaeda is encourages the use of wildfire as a form of jihad.
Did anybody with common sense at the FBI really, did they just think really hard before they wrote this report, or did they just write the report?
The FBI was quoting from the Inspire magazine, the Jihad magazine. This is the map from the Jihad magazine showing the areas that are particularly susceptible to wildfire jihad. They're smart enough to figure out we got a problem. This is some kind of troubling thing. Ecuador auctions off the Amazon to the Chinese oil firms. They had a debt they couldn't pay. That's a little frightening in terms of what our financial situation is like and who holds our debt. Okay, why does it matter? Let's talk about something else for a minute here. Economics and prosperity. more than $150 trillion in minerals and locked up in the federally controlled land. That's according to, I should know the answer. This is a federal publication. It's their own, federal's own
Minerals
assessment.
Management Agency or something.
150 trillion. Now, you could make a dent in the national debt with that, but it's locked up. There are rare earth minerals. You've got a bunch of them here.
We have a couple $100 billion locked
Yeah.
up in one mine,
Right.
zoned for mining.
Rare earth minerals. You know where we're getting all of our rare earth minerals right now? China. And we don't have another access other than what is locked up on our public land. That's a huge concern to us from a military security point of view. Okay, 9 times the national debt locked up. Can the states do better? This is so fun, all right? This is a presentation that was done by the Nevada Land Management Task Force. They hired this, commissioned this thing. By the way, Sarah, $500,000 is what it cost us to do the study. That's what the state appropriated. Okay. What they concluded was that states can and do manage their public lands more profitably. BLM consistently spends more than it takes in, and it's less efficient. Its labor is less efficient. Wildfire suppression costs are greater per acre for the BLM. Look at some of the statistics here. This is kind of fun. Washington's Department of Natural Resources harvests 30 times more than the federal government does per acre on lands managed by the federal government. And keep in mind that Washington is sustained yield here, maximum use sustained yield. 30 times more. Look at Montana, 19 times more. Idaho, 52 times more. Washington State makes 1,283 times more revenue per acre than the Forest Service does. That starts to put it in perspective for those of you who work with the governor's office. When you start looking at your budget and saying oil prices are going down, we are in a heap of trouble. And you start looking for revenue sources, I suggest that this might be a place you could look. Because states do manage far more effectively than the Fed. These are observed high, low, and average. Look down at the bottom line, expenses per acre. The states have $9 an acre, high 43 cents an acre, low, and an average of $3.20 in expenses. The federal government has $3.11. Look at this next table. Net profit per acre. States do about $9.75 as a high, $4.36 as a low, and $6.29 average. Net profit per acre. Look at the federal government side. Lost $2.75. Wow. Lost $1.01, but the average was lost of $1.86 an acre. You multiply that by the millions of acres that the federal government owns, and we can make a case to the east that you really sure you want to supplement us out here like this? You know what PILT costs? You know what the management of the federal lands costs? And it's the eastern states that are helping significantly to pay that portion of the bill. That's why South Carolina passed a resolution in their legislature supporting the transfer of public lands. We went up to, what's the state that does, the very first state in the election cycle?
New Hampshire.
New Hampshire. Ken went up and did a presentation in New Hampshire, just passed a resolution in support of the transfer of public lands. They're tired of paying the bills too. So we think this is going to be an easy sell in the eastern state as it is in the western state, if we get the numbers on the table. Federal government, this is, Affordable Care Act. Don't you love the Affordable Care Act?
Yeah.
Just makes your heart warm all over, right? Isn't it interesting how every time that they name a bill,
It doesn't match what the name of the bill says?
you don't think that's the affordable? No, I don't think it is either. Okay, so, but there was a little godsend came out of the Affordable Care Act. It's kind of the Grow Up Act, and I hate it as bad as you do, but look what the Supreme Court said in this, and let me just teach you a little lesson about this, about what they're trying to say to us as states. What they're basically saying was, look, you elected this guy, You elected these legislators, they passed the bill, and you states need to listen. The federal government has expanded dramatically over the past 2 centuries, but it still must show that a constitutional grant of power authorizes each of its actions. The same does not apply to the states, because the Constitution is not the source of their power. State governments do not need constitutional authorization to act. And he says this, he said our cases refer to the general power of governing possessed by the states, but not by the federal government as the police power. Low battery, don't you dare go out on me. The framers thus ensured that powers which in the ordinary course of affairs concerning the lives and the liberties and the properties of the people were held by governments more local and more accountable than a distant federal bureaucracy. This becomes a big deal when the federal government starts. My wife just got home from the ball game. We deny any one government complete jurisdiction over all the concerns of public life. Federalism protects the liberty of the individual from the arbitrary power. Okay. This is the gem right here. In the typical case, we look to the states to defend their prerogative by adopting the simple expedient of not yielding to federal blandishments when they do not want federal policies to be their own. The states are separate and independent sovereigns. Sometimes they have to act like it.
Where is that?
That's the Affordable Care Act decision.
Is that the majority opinion?
That was Chief Justice John Roberts wrote this.
Wow.
That was the 9-4 that made Obamacare a tax.
That's right.
Which means that it should have gone to the House of Representatives again for reconsideration, because only the House has tax and spend authority.
That would be an interesting.
So what Roberts is saying is that the federal government is gonna expand indefinitely, and it's the state's job to push back.
That's exactly right.
So we're only happy to do that.
We lost a real asset in the 17th Amendment. The 17th Amendment was a big problem. And if there was any way to repeal that, my goodness, that would be a godsend, if we could repeal that thing. But what that did is, see, the senators had been appointed by the legislatures of the states. And when they made that a popular vote, the state legislatures lost their power in the federal government. It was a huge mistake.
Huge.
And it has crippled the state's ability, but there's still some other things that we can do. And basically, part of our message is states need to grow up. And when the federal government says we're going to do something, the states need to be able to say, no, actually you're not, because we refuse. Nullification needs to come back. Anyway, this was one of our little-known founders, John Dickinson. He said it'll be their own fault if the several states suffer the federal sovereignty to interfere with the things of their respective jurisdictions. I couldn't agree more. We have failed to protect our citizens from the power of the federal government. We have failed as states. And we need to step up. We need to get these governors, we need to get behind the governor so the governor isn't out there on a limb all by himself. We need to get squarely behind him and say, you need to help us, but we'll be behind you. And then these governors need to go to the legislature of the United States and say, you can't do that to us. We're not going to stand for it.
Can we get Bambi out there, because Bambi's getting killed by the environmentalists. Can we, get Bambi up there on the mic and stop killing the forest?
Okay, here's what I want you to do. If you are part of an organization, I want you to sign a resolution. We've got on the website, we have dozens of resolutions. You can pick one at your will, kind of modify it as you will, and get your organization to sign a resolution in support. Send it to us. We're going to take 1,000 resolutions. In Utah, cities are signing them, counties are signing them, school boards are signing them. I mean, everybody's signing the resolution. Send them to the governor's office, send them to us. Copy your legislators. Make sure we have a copy. Eventually, we take these resolutions. I want you to sign a resolution. Sign them individually. Sign them as this organization. Sign them. Pick one and sign it. I want you to do that. If you just take a few minutes, you've got them written out. You can pick one at your choice. Do whatever. Okay. Education is our biggest obstacle. I have very rarely given this presentation where people say, well, you're just crazy. This is a bad idea. I haven't had that happen to me very often, and I've presented to a lot of folks. I've even presented to federal folks, and after the meeting, they come up and say, will the state give us a job?
We're cutting back on that.
Yeah, help us spread the word. You're on Facebook, you're on Twitter, go to the American Lands Council, you see something you like it, share it. Let's get this message out. The more people who begin to understand what we have at stake and what the opportunities are, the sooner we will accomplish the goal of the transfer of public lands. When I first began this process, and we started deciding what our issue was going to be, and we decided it was going to be the transfer of public lands, I was just like you. Oh my goodness, how do we ever get there from here? I'm not there anymore. I'm pretty confident that, because truth is on our side, and I have so much confidence in truth, it just kind of resonates, does it not? Even if you're an environmentalist, it kind of resonates. Because once they realize that they've been funding the very thing that was causing environmental devastation, I've seen some of them that were just right ticked off about that. And so let's educate. Education is so important. This ought to be a campaign issue. We hope that on the 2016 election, this is one of the major campaign issues in the election of the 2016 cycle. It got pretty big in a lot of the states in 2014. We've got a video of this I don't know who it was, put on a Meet the Candidate night, and they asked the same question to every single candidate. Do you support this, do you support that, and do you support the transfer of public lands? And the last ones were getting up and saying, no, no, yes, no, no, yes. They didn't even wait for the question. There was a lot of political liability in not being supportive of the transfer of public land. Thank you so much for your time. I've kept you a long time. You're very patient. I got a midnight flight. Any questions? Should I wear you? Huh? Yes. My zip drives are probably in my suitcase. Are they here? We set them out?
I'll get them, Doug.
You grab my.
Field the question. I have a question that you can address. What's happened to Canada's federal lands in the Yukon and the Northwest Territory?
Thank you. Yeah, just an exciting thing happened as we get in the middle of this thing. A couple of months ago, we hear news that Canada has relinquished title to the Northwest Territories back to the provinces. Now, can you imagine such a thing as that? They just did. Wow. That's exactly right.
It's our neighbor.
Yeah, it is our
Something they
neighbor.
didn't know about a few years
Socialist
ago.
Canada.
Well, they're running out of money because they had the Affordable Care Act before we did.
Good point. Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, I'm the National Director for Citizens Initiatives. I want to give you my card. When you talked about nullification, this is nullification on steroids. This repeals those laws, and I want to get this to you. So this, a lot, what you're doing is another step in part of the arsenal that we can take our lands back as well as our liberties back.
Yeah, thank you. That would be really good. I'd love to have that. And we need to kind of get together, your organization and mine.
Yeah.
And we can help each other out a little bit. Thank you so much. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Would your presentation here be available maybe on a PowerPoint slideshow somehow if we can't get?
You know what? If you'll go on this website, I'm pretty confident that you can find a far better presenter than me. Ken Ivory's the best spokesman I've ever seen in my life. And I think you can find the information that I've just given you with one of the quintessential teachers of all time. The guy is absolutely amazing. Those of you who've seen him know what I'm talking about.
Isn't it on the hard drive?
Could be on the hard drive. I'm not exactly sure if it's on there or not.
Is Ken Ivory, is that the representative in Utah?
He is.
Okay.
He's a House of Representatives, a member of the House.
Matter of fact, he's looking at sponsoring the countermand amendment in Utah.
He,
So he's co-sponsored.
American Lands Council hired him as our president and CEO. He is our guy.
Yeah, he's smart.
Oh,
He's sharp.
He is smart.
Yeah, we've had him on our radio show, so he, we
Yeah.
had, yeah, I know who you're
He's
talking
awesome.
about.
Any other questions? Yes.
Doug, I just wanted to say thank you for this presentation. You know, it's been a point of frustration, the federal overreach that's been happening in Alaska in the West for me. And so it's just nice to be able to have this solution, you know, that's being given to us that we can exercise. You know, it's awesome, so thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Alaska Policy Forum and United for Liberty most definitely appreciate you coming and informing us. If you're not familiar with our website, we have United for Liberty Alaska. You can go on there and I'll post a lot of links and things of that nature with regard to the information you have here. And I'll get real active because, you know, clearly the most important issue as far as I'm concerned is our land and conveying it to the citizens. Here in the state of Alaska, it's real interesting. You know, the person that's most appreciated in the state of Alaska for conveying land was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. We wouldn't even have the valley, Matanuska Valley, if it wasn't for the act of Homestead Act out there. And I think that's kind of egregious that we have, you know, to thank Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So, you know, certainly it's our responsibility as citizens today to get active, engaged, and make sure that we're, you know, we're not just in here listening, that there's actions, items that we can do. And, you know, that's what Alaska Policy Forum and United for Liberty stand for, is bringing groups together and coming up with action items. If we're in here just to be entertained, then we're missing the point. Alaska needs to be part of this entire process, and by being active and signing resolutions and getting them out and getting all the members of all these organizations together and sign these resolutions, let's send a clear message to the federal government that Alaska is clearly in favor of, you know, consigning the federal lands back to the state of Alaska, and the state of Alaska consign them to the citizens of Alaska.
Do we have, a question on the, with our statehood act, with what he was saying, where we don't have anything, where Hawaii had a lot to say about it. Would we have to have a Alaska State Constitutional Convention in order to reverse that? Or how can we, can it be
Rick Davies
reversed?
is the kind of the resident expert about the statehood compact, but clearly the statehood compact clearly says in there that we enter into the nation on equal footing, which is the same language that they're using here. And so the whole question here is, what is equal footing? One, and the second thing is that Doug's bringing up clear indications of conveyance of land, that their responsibility is to dispose the land back to the sovereign states, to hold it in trust, to dispose of it. I will clearly tell you that the federal government is in clear violation of the statehood compact, because they gave us 100% jurisdiction of the wildlife and fish.
Right.
And we certainly know that that's not the case. So there is a clear breach of contract with regard to the statehood compact. But clearly, the most important thing is right in the beginning. It says that we will enter into the nation on equal footing with all other states. Mark?
Yeah, given Robert's decision in 2012 on the Affordable Care Act, is basically what he's saying, the states have to do this. You know, we have to assert our rights in order to have it. Now there's two ways that we can do that. Alaska's got an initiative process. We can process an initiative and take the ball forward using the initiative process, saying we're taking control of these lands. The other one is our state legislature, which I think that's particularly where we should start the ball going, is within our state legislature to give them the opportunity to show that we're supporting them in taking back our state, our lands.
Kathy, you're listening, right?
I'm listening. I have this paper, I have David's.
So once we get these, once you get your organizations with these resolutions, I think you need to get them in the hands of friendly legislators that can then turn around and start the process of putting this legislation out in front of the public, where we have a chance to testify and change the public's mind on this situation going forward. I mean, it might take 3 or 4 years. But once we get the conversation going, we can show all the white paper and all the justification to Alaskans to get them on board with the idea. And once they are, you've seen it with the marijuana issue. Once Alaskans are on board with the idea, we can move it forward. Multiple states doing it, and then all of a sudden, 5 or 6 states cannot be ignored. The federal government will then have to address it on their level.
Right, and I don't like to quote Democrats, but I'll do it again. Is Rahm Emanuel said, "Don't let a good crisis go to waste." And we're in a financial crisis here in the state of Alaska, and the timing is such that, as Doug pointed out, that the state and private ownership conveys and develops land substantially better than
Well,
than
and
any
I
other
think there is
entity.
an issue with payment in lieu of taxes lately too, that they're not
Correct.
really coming up and
Correct, I
giving us
saw
our
that,
full value.
I don't remember them paying us taxes for the land that they're holding in trust, you know, but that's a different story. I guess they could say that because they give it, they're so benevolent in their grants to the states.
I wanted to say that Mark, I agree with everything that you just said, and I think that it is very important that, because we have the chair of the Senate Resources Committee in this room, and Kathy, thank you for being here, but it's important that we all keep up the pressure. We have all experienced at different times what happens when good legislation gets introduced and the leadership loses the strength to carry it through. So, my thing is that if we push this, we have to keep pushing it until the legislature passes it and the governor signs it. We cannot back down on this issue because the stakes are too high. The stakes are too high. The federal overreach has gotten too out of hand, and that's all I have on that.
Well, and I concur with that because, and it's not what Kathy can or can't do. There has to be an educational process. There has to be letters to the editor, every newspaper in the state. I mean,
On
consistent.
Facebook, yeah.
Those are the kinds of things that will begin to get people knowledgeable. And the legislature can hold hearings, they can ask for a report, they can do things like that, but it takes the general public to get behind it.
Absolutely.
They can't act. They've got to have the cover of us.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions? Thank you all for coming. Appreciate it very much so.